star someday. Yeah. Mama came to the door with a teardrop in her eye. Johnny said, don't.
Splashback still coming. It might not be over. Sassy Boom stopping. Splashback from third last has got up. Oh, that's a big win. Splashback has won it.
Don't you know that you are a shooting star? Don't you know? Don't you know? Don't you know that you are a shooting star? And all the world will love you just as long as you are.
But She's an Artist scampers to the front. 100 to go. She's an Artist is going to put pay to them. She's a good horse. She's an Artist.
Went straight up to number one. Suddenly everyone loved to hear him sing a song. Watching the world go by, surprising it goes so fast. Johnny looked around him and said, well, I made the big time at last. Don't you know? Don't you know? Don't you know that you are?
And now on PG Podcast Network, it's time for the year-round carnival with Vince Accardi and your host, Racetrack Rolfie.
Couple of shooting stars indeed at Flemington seem to emerge. Looking forward to talking to Vince Accardi here on the year-round carnival. Thanks for checking us out. Of course, that audio, Matt Hill's typically brilliant calls, courtesy of racing.com. The stakes racing was at Ipswich. Very keen to talk with Vince about that as well as a little historical one I just want to bring out from the archive. Vince Accardi from Daily Sexuals. Good morning to you.
Top of the morning to you, Ralphie. Here we are on another great day.
Let's pin the shoulders back, because before we deep dive into Ipswich and the stakes races there, it's a time of year we can go a little bit left field. Now, I take it you didn't take in any of the Royal Ascot last week, did you, while you're clocking everything in Australia?
No, not really, but I did see some results come up on the screen, but I haven't sort of dived in and had a look at what have they actually really done.
Well, look, I just like one of the great fundamentals of doing this is good, fast races produce good, fast horses, and that's what real form lines are. And I just read this headline from RaceNet: Golden Eagle runner-up at wins at Royal Ascot as Stormboy folders. Never mind Stormboy, it can do its own thing. Former Australian boom colt Stormboy again disappointed. Golden Eagle runner-up Lazar shine brightly to prevail in the Group 1 Queen Elizabeth Jubilee Stakes. Now, I just want to ask you about this Golden Eagle. At the moment, it's not a Group 1. It'll inevitably be a Group 1. How good a race that was. And Lazar in a straight line, what type of speed did it produce at Rosehill? Because this has come up as one of the most amazing form lines we've ever seen. So just from Lazar, I remember you saying, and Lake Forest, they're both very serious horses.
Yeah, they are, but Lazar, I mean, Ralphie, that day, 12.6 lengths above the standard for 1,500 at Rosehill. That
800.
Yeah, that's to the 800 metre. That was huge. I mean, to realistically was home, wasn't it? At that bumping speed, which it's something the horse had never had done before as well, which is really important to add. Between the 8 and the 400, this horse was still travelling above benchmark, half length above. And what was probably most notable, even though it was de-accelerating, the de-acceleration between the 400 to the 200 to the finish line, it went down to like 3 lengths below benchmark between the 4 and the 2, and 3.5 over the last 200 metres off that booming speed. To put a little bit of context around it, I mean, there was a number of runners that were running at a very, very high pace in that race. Like the winner, for example, was breathing 7.5 lengths easier in the run. This was the winner, Lake Forest. So in other words, through the first half of the race, the horse was going over a second slow in it. That's all energy conserving. In the mid-race, the move was half the amount. Like it was declining in speed. Like it was only 0.8 above benchmark versus 0.4 Lazard. And then, yes, of course, the last 400 metres and the last 200 metres were far superior. But when I look at that last 200 metres, Lake Forest plus 1.3 and Lazard minus 3.5, and you actually bring that into content, that's, let's call it 5 lengths, about 3/4 of a second. that is still nowhere near as effective as what the winner did. In other words, as the runner-up did, if Lazard had just gone one length slower, it wins. And if it had gone at the same pace as Lake Forest, it probably beats it by 3 or 4.
So what did you score Lake Forest on the day for winning?
Well, on the Raws, Lake Forest came up 7.4 and adjusted 3.9, and Lazard ended up with 6.6 and 3.1.
So the reason I
above.
asked you that is we've seen some Group 1s in South Australia and Queensland recently in the plus 1.5 range. This at the moment race is at a Group 1. So let's talk through some of the place getters here. Tom Kitten, I remember you saying, well, this is either going to make Tom Kitten or break him because it was his first prep as a gelding. He came back in dynamic fashion, but he came in found heat, plus 8.8 in the first part of the race, 3.1 overall. Well, he came back and he won an All-Star Mile, so it did make him.
Absolutely. I mean, that run of that horse was also tremendous. And it's really ironic when you, again, just really trying to shine that light on Lazard. Tom Kitten was pretty much conserving 4 lengths when you compare it to Lazard, and yet the last 200 metres, there's only a length and a half difference between the two in favour of Tom Kitten. I mean, that further sort of highlights how good the runner-up was and what tremendous pressure can do, particularly if you're tasting it for the first time, to a horse. Usually, Ralphie, when they run that fast for the first time, they do struggle to end up in the money, and yet this horse almost won. And Tom Kitten, well, I felt this horse has had a lot of talent. Hasn't really been able to go to that absolute next level, but in the contents of what we were talking about and what it did there, it was probably one of its highlight performances.
He went on to run third to Via Sustina.
Yep.
Steffi Magnetica was the unlucky runner on the day. Zach Lloyd had a good year. This wasn't his good ride. He zigged when he should have zagged. It was desperately unlucky. Got beaten 2 lengths. But outside the unluckiness of it, talk us about the reversal of speed. And we're going to do the Tatsiara this week. The Tatsiara last year she won. She ran an unlucky 5th in this race. Went on to win a Doncaster. Just compare what she had to do in the Golden Eagle and taking away the unlucky nature of it compared to what she had to do in the Doncaster, the reversal of speed.
Yeah, well, see, this is the thing. The pressure of a race can change the dynamics tremendously. I feel that, like Steffi, when you sort of compare it like to the winner Lake Forest and you just look at their positioning running, they were at a similar pace. Although Steffi Magnetti used a little bit more fuel, had to extend a little bit further in the mid-race than you've articulated, like what's happened in the race. But ultimately, the way the horse held on was very, very strong, Ralphie. If all things were even, could it have beaten, say, a Lake Forest? I'm not sure if it would have beaten it, but it definitely would have made it a more serious content. But I still feel that if you want to compare it to Lazard, the gap's big.
Oh, no doubt. But compare it to what it did in the Doncaster on the 5th of the 4th at obviously at Randwick, the famous mile. It's gone in the Randwick mile, and normally that's a murderous pressure mile. This is what I wanted to underline, that this year was such a weird soft tempo. It went nearly 13 lengths slower in the Doncaster compared to the Golden Eagle first section.
Yeah. And it's funny, like when you have these sort of dynamic race shapes about what it can do. Luck does play a role in that. But still, the extension that you've got to use in the mid-race sometimes gets, dramatically exposed when you have such a soft first section. I do have to admit myself personally, I love the races where there's pressure all the way. It generally, in my view, sometimes takes away a little bit of the unluckiness with most horses, not all horses, most horses in a race. And secondly, you truly get to see what the overall capacity of a horse's sustained pressures like. And for me, when I look at a race shape and you compare the two, definitely the race from November, this is the Golden Eagle of last year, was far superior in my view in terms of how well you can perform comparing it to a race where there's no tempo. Because a lot of horses, Ralphie, when there's no speed, they can be giant late. And it's sort of can be a bit of an illusion about how good are they really, because you get this booming finish and you feel like, oh, look at the talent, but there's nowhere to hide when you're running fast and you still have to finish strong. And even though like a horse like Steffi was below benchmark late, the reality is the amount of pressure that the horse had to endure before even having any tactical issues, over the last couple of 100 metres, the reality is they're the runs that I love the most. I mean, even Port Lockroy, who finished behind Steffi, that was a massive run as well. Had to do a lot more work than Steffi. Jolly Star, that was the day that horse got cut, found out as well, Ralphie, about its kryptonite, like it can't handle high pressure. And this is what you learn.
Yeah, so Port Lockroy, by the way, its next start, it then won the Railway in Perth.
Yep.
It went from 7.5 in the Golden Eagle to 3.2 first section in the Railway. It was giggling. It's leading. Yep. It's gone from being back in the field going 7.5 to going 4 legs slower, but up front.
and so this is the other dynamics, where you are in a campaign as well. Sometimes these sort of high pressure races, if you go into a race where there are a lot softer tempo, like you just mentioned, they can be massive advantages. And if you understand, it can be a great advantage as a punter as well.
So if people just listen to this for the first time, or just half listening, would say, "Hang on, what's Vince talking about that's kryptonite for Jolly Star?" Because she went on to win a Newmarket, she went on to win a Stradbroke, the Kingsford Smith Group 1 at Eagle Farm. She went on to get narrowly beaten by Jimmy Star. She's a really good horse, that she is, Vince. But not one start during the autumn. From probably from the summer, I should say. Well, not one start this prep, and Chris Waller did an amazing job. Did she break benchmark first section? What was her first section in the Golden Eagle?
Yeah, +8. And see, this is where the big exposure comes, when you put the microscope on them and they run that hard. But that also can help make horses as well.
Yes.
No question about they learn. Well, usually two things, Ralphie. They either learn to adapt, or they just end up, as soon as they feel pressure, they don't want to try anymore. And
it can be curricular, can't it? Yeah, for some horses.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's not much more to say other than you can just keep going down, because War Machine, the 8th horse, he's won the Stradbroke. You've got Skybird who won in Lightning. So what an amazing race that really was, the Golden Eagle. All right, well, we're going for not quite chocolates and boiled lollies, but Ipswich had their standalone meeting on Saturday. Oh, Vince, it's one of those tracks, isn't it? You're either in the right spot or you're in the wrong spot.
Well, yes, that can be a real prevailing factor at that track. Mind you, I thought the track had a fair level of speed in it as well, which was good to see. Yep.
Yeah, so they really rocked and rolled along up front. I did the set it as well, Vince, and the Ipswich Cup came up. I thought, what a disappointing race this is for $250,000 at their standalone card, and ultimately it became Chaos Theory 101 with Flash R winning. He's had 6 traders. That was his first win in 1,000 days. So what did we see in race 7, the Ipswich Cup?
Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, the mounting yard communication coming out of Sky, actually put a bit of a positive light on that horse.
Yes, it was a good day for the yard. A couple of good spots I saw on Channel 7 as well.
The reality is this: if you look at the history of that horse, there are some little signals if you're good enough to find it, right?
Yeah.
But it's not about good enough to find it. It's more about shining the light to say, okay, how does a horse like this win, right?
Yes.
Now, the crazy thing is this. If you go back in time, this horse here, not that I suggest that you should be looking at form going back to 22, but from an historical point of view, if you're trying to want to make an engagement and say, okay, at its absolute best, if everything was right, not that I was thinking this, right, the horse did have a performance at Bendigo, 2.8 lengths above IVR benchmark. So if you look at it from that point of view, you could have one sort of thought process. There was also a performance back in 21 at Eagle Farm, which was a half length above benchmark. Now, I'm only pointing this out to put a few things into context. First of all, like when I'm looking at the racing analytics data profiling and just looking at all the performances, let's say over the last 5 days, the standard requirement, just off that alone, the profile of all the runners was pretty much like a benchmark half length below or inferior to that. So if you knew a horse was like at the top of its game and there was a chance that this horse could come out and run big, then you could have considered it, right? Because there was also a run at Flemington over 1,700 metres that was 0.8 below benchmark that you would have marked as a possibility. But I certainly didn't feel any of those things were going to be taking place with a horse like this. And then the last part is this. It's the setup of the race. The pace was virtually benchmark, half length below through that first 2/3 of the race. And then, in my view, that's reasonable speed from a lead perspective. But I looked at the 3 or 4 horses that were up in the, like in the final top 4, and you have a look at what they were travelling at. Flash R was 6.6 lengths below benchmark. Felix the Cat was 7 lengths below benchmark through the first section. Raff Attack was 5.6 and Poetic Drama 8.4. So that group of horses were all travelling roughly 6 to 8 lengths below benchmark. And realistically, the winner was right on the cusp of almost being in the golden position of where, generally for staying races, I always say you've got to be no more than 8 lengths off that lead speed, but this horse was actually virtually 6 lengths off him. I felt that the other big key factor here was the move in the mid-race. That mid-race squeeze of the winner was 8.8. Now, when I compared it to the other 3 horses that finished behind it, with the exception of Raff Attack, they were all in virtually 12 lengths. Their mid-race squeeze was like 4 lengths more aggressive. Therefore, there was a depletion of energy over the last 200 metres compared to the winner. This all helped, in my view, the performance that allowed this horse to win. Now, on the scorecard, 1.7 lengths below benchmark. If you sit back and say, well, yeah, okay, it's probably within its wheelhouse, Ralphie, given the history of the horse. Now, if we look at just strictly this campaign with the 4-6 days off, well, that last run at Sunshine Coast, 3.7 below, race matrix indicating about a length stronger. It was top 10 for the day. Maybe you could sit there and say you're a chance of improving another length. So the horse has improved a couple more to get victory. But I feel that the setup of the race is what got a victory.
I wouldn't be surprised if Miss Jolene's set for Sunshine Coast on the bigger track, and they'll be hoping for some wet weather there, just from a horses to follow point of view. And just before we get to the other 2 stakes races, also from a horses to follow point of view, I'll get to it. But first, I'll get you to explain what happened with these first 2 horses, Mr. Bianco and Stay Focused, because it looked like they were rocking and rolling up front.
Which race is this, Ralphie?
Race 6.
Race 6, okay.
Because I reckon I've got a little present for our listeners here.
Well,
what happened here?
Well, let's have a look at it. I mean, those first 2 runners, Mr. Bianco is going 4.6 above, and Stay Focused is going plus 5.7. So that's right up there on the day in terms of how hard are you going in terms of speed. That's like right up there, very, very quick, Ralphie, pace-wise. Well, when you have this sort of setup, and then you look at a number of other horses, sometimes when you're running so fast, it's very difficult for back markers or horses that are trying to be in the zone to have much chance of being able to reel in, because the move in the mid-race has got to be massive. Like if you look at, say, Bollinger Miss, who's run 3rd, it's travelling 3.9 lengths below benchmark, but it's too much. It's well outside of the band. You're talking about virtually 10 lengths off the leader. You have to make this massive move in the mid-race, which was almost 7 lengths, the move in the mid-race, at a 10.7 length mid-race squeeze. And then when you go further back and you look at a bunch of other horses, they've had to make monster moves in the mid-race. They're going too slow. They're not thinking about where they should be positioned. And mind you, the 3rd horse is already too far back. So was it sustained endurance from the first 2 horses? I would have to say yes, Ralphie, because you have a look at the mid-race. The winner actually increased the pace. In my view, let's just say at worst, holding the speed. 4.6 above to 4.9 above. It is entitled to deteriorate. The deterioration over the last 400 metres, was nowhere near as dramatic. So in other words, it's done its job superbly. The second horse, Stay Focused, probably did too much work.
I reckon he would have slept well.
Yeah, he definitely would have slept well. First two sections plus 11. And the last 400 was only minus 3.7, only a length inferior to the winner. And so that also gives you the answer. That extra work early penalises you late.
So I reckon there's a little horse to follow here called the 300. Regan Bayless didn't have a good day. and even though he did ride a winner, he had some things go wrong. And I'm not blaming him, by the way, on this one. But this is just your classic race shape, Vince, because I've checked the steward's replay, the head on. The horse just completely stuffed up the start. So from a horse who would have been on pace and probably the way the race unfolded, stalking the leaders, he's ended up way back. Talk us through what he had to do in the mid race, because the reason I'm highlighting it, he was back on clean ground. That first up second at Warwick Farm, that was a proper race behind Media World, who's gone on to become a stakes performer. I think if he stays on clean ground and just gets away cleanly, he can really elevate from here. So what did he do in that mid race?
Well, if you have a look, Ralphie, both Dream Smart and the 300 grand, their mid races moves were 13.7 and 13.4. They were the biggest of the day in terms of how much energy you had to produce in the middle. And you've also got to bring in the contents. How far above benchmark between the 8 and the 4? The 300 grand was 7.4 lengths above benchmark, and Dream Smart 7.5. Interesting, when you look at their last 200 metres, they've done well to break benchmark, both of them.
Yes.
Of course, this sort of then brings into context what you're saying. Had you have been 5-6 lengths closer, no doubt the result would have been a lot better for these two horses, and they were two big hidden runs. Well, if you want to call them hidden.
Yeah, hopefully that can help our listeners there. Let's get to the other couple of stakes races, and again, look, I was watching this in the run. I'm sort of being a bit of hindsight and a bit of couch jockey here, but this is race 8, the Eyeliner Stakes, won by Orton. Before we get to Orton's performance, on Warney, it was like they were paranoid about how the track was playing rather than just riding the race to suit the horse. And I thought, I don't know if you're doing right getting to second line. Now, from there, he had no luck. But the question was, could he have, should, and we're all talking hindsight here on the Tuesday, have just relaxed a little bit with that horse and just allowed the others to make mistakes up front, because clearly once they straightened and the leaders came back in the lap, he was in nowhere land.
Yeah, well, first of all, it's really interesting when you now compare these. This is race 8 you're talking about, right? When you compare the two 1350 metre runs, I find it really interesting, because the winner of race 6, or the two place getters, they're travelling between 5.7 and 4.6 above. And in this race here, Orton's going 2.6 below, Shah of Goma's going 0.6 below, and the lead speed and the horse who took up all the running, which was 2.8 above, that was that Rock Beard.
Rock ribbed.
Rock ribbed, and then Lost in Transit 2.3. So they were the two, horses up on pace. They did nothing late, like absolutely nothing. Interesting. What I loved about, let's say, Orton's run firstly is the 2.6 lengths below benchmark. When you look at it in perspective to the pace, it's a good position to be in. But where the true strength, in my view, was, first of all, there was a critical slowdown between the 6 and the 4, where a lot of other horses on the day didn't have that. The horse lost 3.2 lengths, Ralphie. This is probably the big hidden gem there. And then 4 to the 2 plus 0.9, last 200 at 1.5 above. Hence the reason why the horses ended up second best performance of the day with a half above. And even the second horse, when you look at that run, even though its mid-race move was not as dynamic as the winner, it still did very well to hold on and only capitulated, in my view, over the last 200 metres, which could signal a bit more improvement to come.
Well, they were both rails in running behind Warney, and we often see that the horse who has no luck third the fence, it's the ones behind who start peeling, have the luck. Just on historics, and I know we're only got limited data with Warney. Do you think he's better horse being relaxed below benchmark, or like they were here, putting him in the race? What's your opinion so far on him? And again, I underline, I know we've only had limited exposure to him. First prep now as a gelding.
Well, if you look back at that Flemington running back in November, the horse was asked to go +2 in that race. Now, the lead speed was 3.5 above, so he sat in a good position, couldn't quite hold, and weakened. Now, if you look at, let's say, the leading run at Eagle Farm, 3.5 lengths below benchmark, reasonable move between the 8 and the 4 of -1, finished nice and strongly over the last 400 metres with a +4.1. I just sit back here and look at this, Ralphie, and ask myself the question, what is truly your best distance? Obviously, first of all, a situation where there's no speed is probably the big enabler from this horse. And I feel that this horse, when it's asked to run with pace, it gets exposed. Because it is, in my view, I don't want to call it a one-paced horse. It does have a good cruising speed. It does have some versatility, but it doesn't have a booming sprint. So these horses that don't have the booming sprint are, on the technicals, sometimes suited to more of the grind. And of course, if you can breathe a lot better through the first half of the race, you're going to still be able to sustain it slightly stronger late. But when you're in a scenario where you're racing benchmark or faster, you get exposed. So all I can say about a horse like Warning is, if you turn up and you find yourself in pressure races, don't be surprised if the outcome's similar. And I also feel that it exposes it to the distance. There has to be a little bit of a question mark about how well it's going to run at a distance range of 14 to 16, say, for instance, if you're faced with that type of setup. If you can get the soft tempo, you'll get it. But if you're going to have pressure, you're not. So this horse would have been a lot better suited running another 2-3 pairs back, still being an opportunist to win, but be able to breathe better through the first half of the race. In other words, come off and run 3-4 lengths below benchmark. But I'm saying all this to you, Ralphie. You've got to look at the contents of where it is in its campaign. Sometimes horses like this can improve a lot off a run like that, and it's the Mars stable.
Yeah, absolutely. In a fortnight's time, I'd be surprised if they don't keep him there for the Glass House at the Sunshine Coast. So we'll go from the tight track to the big track. So
Yep.
there'll be we'll learn a lot more about him. And just this last race here, Vince, I mentioned, I don't know how you approach it, but when I have a look at a meeting, there's horses I like, and then you start doing the work. And I thought, Gerringong, magnificent. We've put her in Sizzlers. This is her grand final day. But then you do the work, and I thought, there's no spot for you. You cannot get the right run.
Yep.
Now, I know you always say, and that 100%, of course, correct, the Chaos Theory can kick in, and 25%, who knows? But on logic, there was no way she was going to get the right run. And you know what? She didn't get the right run. She was planted wide throughout, whereas Kin, it was the reverse Warning. It got the perfect run, but this time it got clear air. And one thing about Kin, Vince, is it had plain raw stats at 1,200, but it had good peak performances at 1,200 just without winning. It was in fast races.
Yes, it's so true, Ralphie. Well, first of all, when we look at, let's say, these two runners and compare it, that critical first section, and here's where it all happens. Kin is racing with more pressure through the first section, 0.8 below benchmark versus 3.1 Kirinyong. So, okay, there's a couple of lengths difference. The challenge is this. Between the 8 and the 4, yes, they're increasing in pace, but there is a massive difference for that couple of lengths. That's the penalties, right? Yeah. The mid-race move for Kirinyong was 8.5 versus 4.4. So it's doubled the workload. And then look what's happened between the 4 and the 2 on both horses. It's been a much heavier hit for Kirinyong versus King. And then I look at the last 200 metres to say, okay, what does that all equal? Because generally speaking, if Kirinyong had been vastly inferior over the last 200 metres, then you could say, okay, regardless of all the things that have happened, probably all things should still be given to the winner as merit on the day. But the difference over the last 200 metres was only half a length. And when I factor all those things in, Kieran Yong has probably suffered more like 5 or 6 lengths. So if I move half that away, you can be pretty confident, and I'm glad you've done what you said, Ralphie, is probably Kieran Yong would have been able to add 2 lengths to that last 200 metres, and that's been reasonably conservative. And therefore, when you turn that around, you have a length and a half more dominance on overall finish compared to the winner.
And what's noticeable with Gerringong, and we put it in Sizzlers late last year, it really emerged at a couple of those Canterbury meetings, but this time in, and it's unusual for a Waterhouse bod horse, she's relaxing in her run, so I wouldn't be surprised if she can run 1400 this time in, because she's just not showing the same speed she was in her first prep.
Super confident this horse will run that distance, Ralphie, because it is relaxing, and that's a big, big asset. And you've got to look at the signal's almost there in that last run at Eagle Farm. Like, do you have a look at the speed loss from one run to the other? It was like 3.2 lengths in terms of early speed loss, first up versus second up. And the difference in the change was 100 metres. Generally speaking, that shouldn't happen. And then you compare it to like what happened on the weekend. We stayed at this 1200 metres, and there it is. It could only change the speed by a length. In other words, there was only a length more early speed, which is another signal that a horse is potentially looking for a lot more ground.
And just finally, I had to bring this stat up, Vince, with Regan Bayless, and I said he had a tough day, but he coming into the meeting, Ipswich is a quirky track. He'd had 3 rides at the meeting. Angela Jones, and the reason I'm comparing it is Keane versus Warney. They were both inside runs, but I thought Angela Jones rode this so well coming to the turn. She didn't stay right behind the leaders. She almost did a Nash. She just sort of waited back another length. And she, into the meeting, and had 425 runs at Ipswich. So she knew Ipswich backwards, and Regan didn't. And I thought that was probably the difference on those 2 horses. So
for sure,
it's easy for us sitting down, of course, but that's how we look at it. Randwick, I just want to ask you about one horse here, Vince. Randwick, the knockout horse. It's a knockout in race 8. Is this another Kieran Mara merger?
Kieran Mara, I reckon he's got plenty of emergers, Ralphie.
Exactly.
I mean, this is the big thing. But let's look at the run. First of all, overall performance. And this is really, I feel this is a really important highlight. 0.2 above benchmark, 5th best of the day. Now, the horses that run 2nd and 3rd, they've ranked 51 and 62. And more than 4 lengths behind it. That's really important to note, because when you're comparing in the future about a horse like It's a Knockout looks like who's trending very strongly, you might want to be looking at these other horses thinking, oh, but it ran 2nd and 3rd to it. But the reality is they might as well run 10th to it, because they're just in different spheres in terms of capability. It's a Knockout though, Ralphie. I mean, I don't know, like, you know better than me about, like, what sort of things do you feel this stable are going to do with this horse from here?
Well, I can't help thinking sometimes they do that with these horses, that they get their rating really down lower, and they had a bit of a throw at the stumps in some stakes races. Little freshen, they might just, and it's actually before Kieran Mara's Peter Moody, wasn't it? Teach it to win and then just keep winning. And then, they'll probably try and get the front of the spring, taking on some horses that maybe have more in quotation marks class. And she might have won 4 in a row by then and be fit and in the zone and get some stakes racing for her.
Well, the good thing is this: the horse has pretty much levelled up and performed to what it did second up at Randwick. I mean, 0.2 above versus 0.5 above. It's like in that sphere. They've obviously tried a little bit of versatility with the horse in terms of what the dynamics of where we want to try this horse. They did venture out to that 1900 metre race. I felt that run was pretty solid. Even the run at Warwick Farm subsequent to that, this was on the 16th of the 4th. Geez, they went hard that day, Ralphie. I mean, this horse, did all the running, was going 9.7 above.
Oh, wow.
And when you look at it, when you look at it from that perspective, and you have the 66 days, and all of a sudden you want to call it a spell freshen up, and you come out off that sort of run 66 days later back to 1400 at 1400. you're going 3.6 below. That's more than 2 seconds of rest in comparison.
Coiled spring.
Yeah, absolutely. And a little bit of the other little thing is, I don't feel we've seen the very best of this horse either yet. If we just look at what happened for the horse between the 600 to the 200, overall loss of velocity is about 2.5 lengths. So this is a clear signal that it's going to smash through that 0.2, 0.5 range that the horse is sitting at now. And I wouldn't be surprised if we end up with a plus 1.5, 2 horse and it's slightly raced.
Well, it means it's got more wins in store
Yep.
this prep. We're going to do the Tat Sierra this week. So if you want to get our preview podcast for that, we do the deep dive on the Friday, we do the update on the Saturday, and you get Vince's race speed profiles. Of course, if you're a existing customer of daily sectionals, getting the race speed profiles, there's an audio only top up version that you can get via my website, racetrackralphie.com.au. Vincent Fleming, there were some couple of serious performances, I think, anyway. So I can't wait to talk to you about that. That's She's an Artist and Splashback, but we'll do that as our members bonus this week. If you want to become a member, once again, via my website, racetrackralphie.com.au, support the fact that we're independent, corporate bookmaker ad free. Who else can tell you that? And we put this out each and every week for our customers and you good enough to listen. Hope you enjoyed this week's deep dive into the Golden Eagle and the stakes racing at Ipswich.